So another overview of some of the new modules that were added to the VCV library in the last weeks. The first one here is Masino from OME, which is an interesting arpeggiator. So we have different rhythms, Euclidean prime numbers, and so on. And we can choose also the density of the changes, right? So this is also quite interesting. I have here some chords also from another new module from OME, which is a chord generator that is following the system from a composer named Bela Bartok. So this will generate the chords, and then I'm arpeggiating them with Masino. And here I have, again, another new module. This one is from Venom, the VCO lab. Right, so all I have to do is connect the volt per octave, the chord, right, I have here 4-note chords. Right, I can change the density. In the right-click menu, we have also clock resolution settings. So for example, now it's on 2 ppqn. If I take this to 4, for example, right, we get more notes. I can also multiply this by 2. Change the octaves maybe, so it will be in a 2-octave range. Right, there are also different directions, of course, even random. And let's take this, for example, with Euclidean prime and other all sorts of rhythms and also random, but let's stay with Euclidean. Then I can take the density down. Right, and create interesting rhythms. So it's an interesting arpeggiator that allows you more experimental results, I guess. I have here another voice. I'm using again the same chords. This one is with dark energy. Maybe I will solo this. Right, in this case I'm using prime numbers, again 2 octaves. So again, interesting rhythm, arpeggiating the notes of the chord. And another feature the chord generator has, it has also a bass output that will output the bass note of the chords. Again, this is also a new module from the same collection, so you can also experiment with it. And for the bass voice, I have here again a VCO lab with some chorus and a filter and a delay. The next module is the new VCV Compressor. Now this is not a commercial module, but it's also not available for free. If you have the VCV Pro version, then you get this module as a free update. It's quite interesting. It has a few different modes that you can choose from. My favorite, of course, is Tube. It has also side chaining and envelope follower, and it has also different modes of display. So you can see the scope, you can see the input, the sidechain input, the gain reduction, the output, and so on. Here I have, of course, a few examples. So here I have some drums, gate sequencer, sequencing some drums from dock B, mixing them into the compressor. Right, so we can start compressing this. It has also auto makeup, which is also quite interesting. Right, with drums, I always like to take the attack a bit up, not to lose the transients, although it depends what you want to do. Right, we can drive the input. We can take the bass a bit out with a high pass filter. Right, so the bass will not drive the compressor so much. Right, we can change the knee. And we can change the mode. So here there is feed forward, feedback, VCA, optical, which is also quite snappy. FET, and my favorite, Tube. Listen to this. Right, so again, an interesting compressor. This is without. Yes, it's also low in volume, but listen to the transients, listen to the crunch, and with. So this is what I'm doing here with the drums. I'm also sending a copy of this to a delay and a bandpass filter, a modulated bandpass filter, just for fun. Right, I have here also a bass, so I have 3 oscillators that I'm mixing with some chorus. Right, and then I'm using the compressor here for side chaining with the kick drum, right? So I'm sending the kick drum to it, and then I have here side chaining. Again, it has also an envelope follower output that you can see here on the scope. So this you can use for other things, for example, moving the filter also. Then I have here another sort of weird voice. I'm using slips to sequence the VCV VCO going again through a bandpass filter. But I'm using here the whole drums in the sidechain input, so I'm sidechaining this voice with the whole drums, just again to get more movement. Maybe I will solo this. Right, you can hear the movement in level. And then here again I'm using the drums with the compressor, but in this case I'm not compressing anything, I'm just using the envelope follower output. Right, again you can see this here on the scope to bring in some noise again through a bandpass input. And everything I'm sending through another compressor, the whole mix. Right, and again I can see here the gain reduction, I can see the audio output. Right, the input, sidechaining. Again without. Yes, it's lower in volume, but listen to the transients. And with. So really nice compressor, nice sounding, lots of interesting features. The next module is the Pulsar oscillator from Dock B. This is a Pulsar synthesis VCO. Right, so you can see we have this sort of single cycle waves, right? We can change their duty cycle, right? Compress them sorts of. We can change, we have also different waves, right? From sine to saw. Right, and then we can also change their cluster. So we can have, for example, instead of just one pulse in this cluster, we can have, for example, 2, right? And again, change the cycle. We can also change their window, so their envelope, right? So for example, without, you can see it just starts and ends, but we can have this more fading in, right? And then again, change this, how much it will fade in, and add even more clusters, which will sound a bit like additive synthesis. Just adding sine waves, but basically you can see we get those pulsars or pulsarettes that then will create a sound. So again, quite interesting sound source if you want to experiment with new sound design synthesis techniques. Here I have one ADDR sequencer sequencing pitch, another one sequencing the cluster, right, the amounts of waves inside the pulse rate, another one the duty cycle, another one the wave shape. This is going through a delay. So again, we get interesting movement. This is also a polyphonic oscillator, of course. So here I'm using a polyphonic sequencer also from Dock B to sequence chords. Right, this is going through a filter. Let me maybe solo this. Right, so we get also chords. And I have here also a bass. Let me take the levels down so I can show you this one by one. This is basically a bass drone, right? So here I have one pulsar. Then I added another layer with a higher cluster. So again, it will sound like it's in a higher frequency. And then another one even higher. and another one. All of them are modulated, right? So I have here 4 layers basically to create a nice bass sound. And of course, another fun thing to try is cross modulation. I have here 3 of them, and you can see I'm modulating them. They are quite in a lower frequency, but I'm also modulating them or cross modulating them. Right, this for example is modulating this one here, this is modulating here, right? You can see the connections. And this creates nice textures, especially because it's in such a lower frequency. It creates nice sort of clicks and noises. Right, going once through a low pass, one through a band pass, lots of modulation here with LFOs from Secret Cell. New modules from Venom. These are the patch bay modules or the bay modules. They are great if you want to create interfaces or synthesizers in VCV Rack and you want to add a sort of a patch bay functionality. They will basically teleport signals. So here, for example, I have an input module with a few LFOs, and I have here the output module. So the signals will be teleported from the inputs to the outputs without the need to make any connections, right? So for example, if I connect this module to the LFO's input, you see all the names are already there automatically. And then I can, for example, I want a sine wave. I can get a sine wave. This is the signal that comes in here, right? Or the saw wave, and so on and so forth. And you have also the bay norm module that will act as a sort of patch bay, breaking the connection of the internal connection. So for example, this is a common on semi-modular synthesizers. You have internal connections, but through the patch bay, you can break these connections with external signals. So here, for example, the sort of internal connection is a sine wave LFO, but I can break this connection, for example, with a square wave. Right, so now instead of the sine wave, we get here from the input a square wave, so you can build a patch bays also with internal connections and also with inputs to break these connections. But these modules are also quite interesting for creating cleaner patches. You can see here it's a relatively small patch, but still it's quite clean. There are not so many cables going everywhere because again, those patch bay modules will teleport the cable. So for example, I have here a bass, a sequence, another sequence, and some chords. Right, and you can see I'm using, for example, for the clocks, I'm using the input module. By the way, there is no delay between the inputs and the outputs, so the teleporting the cables will not add delay to the signals. So this is also quite important. But here, for example, I'm using this for the clocks, so then I can distribute the clocks. You can see anywhere I can use as many output modules as I want, right? And just make the patch a bit cleaner instead of having everything coming from the clock. You can see I have here the clock modules or outputs everywhere, right? Everywhere I need them for driving sequencers, for syncing delays, for resetting things. And the same with audio. I have here 2 output modules that I'm using to send audio to the mixer, right? So instead of having all the voices, right, all the cables from the voices going to the mixer, I'm sending them into audio modules, and then the audio modules, right, the inputs will go to the mixer. This is, for example, how it would have looked like if I would not use the teleport modules or the patch bay modules. Right, you can see there are cables. Again, it's a relatively small patch, but still there are many cables everywhere. You can see the clock is going everywhere, the audio. Right, so again, if you want, if you are performing live or if you just want to have cleaner patches without cables going everywhere, you can use the patch bay modules. And if you want to build sorts of a semi-modular synthesizer, I've done this a few times. The last one was, for example, with the Moog Labyrinth, and the patch bay is quite useful. The last module I want to show you is the bypass module, also from Venom, that will sort of turn off modules and allows you also to save CPU. Again, this is quite helpful when building synthesizers in VCV rack, but it's also really helpful for live performances. So basically we have 3 channels that we can use. Let me show you how this works exactly, right? We have 3 channels and you can choose what will happen to the input and to the output, right? So for example, the input here I have coming from a sequencer. Let's say that when I bypass things, I want that just a sequencer will be bypassed. So if I change this to source, now the sequencer will be bypassed, and in the output I can also choose what will happen. In this case, the output goes to the VCO. So let's say that for the output I want this to be turned off, and also all of the neighbors to the right. Right, so all of this will be turned off, and actually not really, because there is another module here, you can see this here, the blocker, which will block the bypass, so which means that the delay here will not be bypassed. It will be the neighbors until the blocker. So let's see if I click this now, you see slips turned off, or is now bypassed, and also this chain until the blocker. Right, so again, if you are performing live, this can help you save CPU. For example, you can have multiple patches in one patch, more or less, perform one live, bypass it, and then perform the other one. So you save CPU, you can have very big patches and still not use a lot of CPU, because when a module is bypassed, it will not use any CPU. So again, this is quite helpful. So for example, again, I have here 2 very small patches just to explain this for a second. Right, so I have here patch 1. Let's say I unmute this. Let me run the clock also. Right, I unbypass this and then I can perform it, let's say. Right, let's say that now I perform this patch. Right, and you can see I have here the blocker before the delay, so when I bypass this, the delay will not be bypassed. Right, and then it's bypassed, save CPU, and I can move on to the next patch that I have here. Right, unbypass it. Of course, there is a CV input here for the bypass, so you can choose this also, and then right, perform this and again bypass it and move on to the next patch if you want. So again, it's very helpful when building synthesizers. If you have, for example, a few filters that you can choose just one of them, you can bypass the other ones so they're not using any CPU. And it's very helpful for performing live and bypassing chains to save CPU. I will mention again, let me unbypass this. The VCO lab is also a new module from Venom, but I have already a full video about it. So there will be a link in the description. This is why I'm not mentioning it here too much. That was it for now. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.